Do you have students who can't keep a steady beat or have trouble with rhythm? Do you want your students to internalize music better so they really feel it and can project it to others? Then you need Dalcroze Eurhythmics. Today's guest, Anthony Molinaro, actually took Dalcroze Eurhythmics classes starting at age 5, where he grew up in Pittsburgh. Now he uses the philosophy as a general music teacher in public school and also teaches Eurhythmics at the Interlochen Summer Arts Camp. In this episode, you'll hear about the power of Eurhythmics and how to apply it with your own students to help foster their musicianship in an experiential and fun way. You're listening to The Piano Sensei Way, a podcast for piano teachers who own a studio business and want less stress and more success. Welcome to The Piano Sensei Way. I'm your host, Clinton Pratt, and I'm here to help you master the art of running a successful piano teaching studio. I'm excited to have another Dalcroze Eurhythmics expert on. If you missed the first one, it was episode 4 with Dr. David Frego, and that's called The Way Movement Unlocks Musicality. And we talked about the history and philosophy of Dalcroze Eurhythmics and the 4 pillars, which are Eurhythmics, rhythmic solfege, improvisation, and plastique anime. We talk about the concepts of time, space, and energy, and some example activities and all of that. But now we're going to dive deeper into it and deeper, different, who knows, with our guest today, which is Anthony. So Anthony, tell us where you are and what or who you teach.
Sure. Hey, Clinton, thanks for having me, by the way. I'm really honored to be here and share some time with you. So thanks so much for inviting me. My name's Anthony Molinaro. Yeah, I teach in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. I'm involved at Carnegie Mellon University. I teach at the Preparatory Academy there. And then I also teach in public school around the Pittsburgh area, which I've been doing for a long time. Public school, general music, elementary teaching for like 17, 18 years now. I lose track. But yeah, I generally teach kids, but I also in the summers teach some more advanced students at the Interlochen Summer Arts Academy in Interlochen, Michigan. So, you know, a wide range of ages and ability levels that I'm sort of comfortable using the Eurhythmics with.
Yeah, that's great. And your last name, how do you say it again? Molinaro?
Molinaro. Yeah, you know, Molinaro. I guess if it was Italian, we'd say Molinaro, but this is
Molinaro. Yeah.
Here we'll just say Molinaro, kind of like bow and arrow.
Molinaro. Okay. Yeah, great. Yeah, you mentioned Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon. So I did 2 training weeks there at the Carnegie Mellon Summer Martha Sanchez Institute, whatever it's called. I did that 2007 and 2009.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So yeah, that was fun. And then you mentioned Interlochen. I was a collaborative pianist in the summer of 2010 at Interlochen. And I was assigned to the intermediate musical theater, which, for those who don't know, intermediate is junior high.
Yeah.
So I was there for the 6 weeks, and they were there learning a musical or whatever. But what's really cool is, since I had just been introduced to Eurhythmics for the previous years leading up to that, I asked the director of the theater. I was just the collaborative pianist, right? So I would play for the rehearsals and I played for the show. But I said, hey, I think they could maybe benefit from some Eurhythmics activities. You know, these musical theater students. Do you mind if I lead some of the warm-ups? And they're like, oh yeah, sure. So I did, and it was super fun, and I was so excited to do that. And as you know, it's like using the whole body and listening to music and all this stuff. And they loved it, and they had me do it pretty much every day. So after the first one, they're like, lead the first whatever.
You got more than you bargained for on that.
Yeah. And I love that about Eurhythmics too, is that it's really, really, you can apply it to like any kind of concept, you know, like ensemble, dynamics, phrasing, beat. Like, I don't even think I've came across a problem that I haven't been able to like quote unquote fix.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, and so, you know, at Interlochen, I've been fortunate enough that they have adopted like a eurythmics curriculum, which is like an elective for the music students, which is fun and nice. And I'm glad that they're doing that. But then I've been, like you said, trying to work my way into the various departments to try to add some eurythmics into their offerings. So, you know, I had the opportunity to work with the dance department last summer, which was really eye-opening. I had, you know, occasionally you'll work with a dancer, especially when you're in public school. You'll have in your class, you're like, oh, this kid's clearly a dancer. You know, you can tell by the way they move that they're a dancer. But to have a whole room full of dancers was really, really interesting for me. A little bit intimidating at first, but then I very quickly realized that they weren't especially good at eurythmics. Like, you know, and that's a really interesting phenomenon, because you would assume that, oh, wow, they're just so good at using their bodies, but it's not the same thing. You know, dance and eurythmics is like, I think it's different in intention, you know, like fundamentally, whereas, you know, dance is something that's meant to be observed and watched and enjoyed in that way as an audience member. You know, I don't particularly like watching eurythmics. Does that make sense, Clint? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I don't really like to watch people do eurythmics. I like to watch the teacher and see what they're doing, but there's nothing really exhilarating about watching eurythmics necessarily. But I do love to watch dance, you know, and observe that. And so, you know, eurythmics is meant to be felt. It's for the participants to have an experience. It's not so much outward facing. And so I think that the dancers struggle with that. They're just like, well, tell me what form to use. And it's like, no, you're supposed to discover your own orientation to your body. Right. And they're like, what? Like, no, give me directions. You know, it's like, you know, they're just not accustomed to that. So, yeah, I really find that the other disciplines and in theater as well, like straight theater, not just musical theater, you know, the training is really good for them to learn to just have a little bit more expression, a little bit more character to the way they move. It's really, I think it's, you know, a really versatile practice that can find its way into a lot of disciplines.
Yeah, I actually did eurythmics warm-ups for theater students at the University of Cincinnati. What was it? Oh, it was for high school students to come for like theater camp in the summer. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So like Interlochen, but only like a week or something.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, those were just theater. So not musical theater, just acting. But they asked me to lead warm-ups. I'm like, heck yeah, I will. So yeah, that was fun. So do you have a primary instrument, or what did you? Sure. You know, did you grow up learning the piano or singing or what?
You know, my dad is a music teacher, not oriented to eurythmics, but my dad is sort of a multi-instrumentalist and plays an excellent violinist and guitar player, pianist, plays drums, can play bass, can play whatever. He's a very versatile musician. And so I was sort of raised in that environment. So I guess like when I was in college as an undergrad, my major was the bass. So I played upright and electric bass in my undergrad work. And then I was a professional bassist for a while out in San Diego, California, sort of living my best life doing that. And so, you know, that's probably my major instrument. But I honestly don't play it that much anymore. On occasion, somebody will say, hey, play bass. And that's fine. I play piano more now, although I hardly call myself a pianist. You know, I mean, I play well for my own purposes, but for the esteemed surroundings of the piano sensei, I would say I am, I am not a sensei. I am but a learner on the piano. And then the drums I can play reasonably well too, and I get around on a bunch of different instruments. But and that's one of the reasons I really like eurythmics, is because it's a generalized musicianship that sort of applies to whatever instrument you're on. You know, it's a really nice. One of the things I will say in one of my workshops is I'll pick a random person and I'll say, what instrument do you play? You know, and they'll say, oh, I play the piano. And I'll say, no, you don't. So you play your body, right? Which happens to be touching a piano sometimes, right? And so like the thing that creates the musical impulse is this, right? And then whatever vibrating object you're manipulating, it all works. It all comes from in here. It all comes from that ability to evoke music with your body. And so, that's the, I think that's why it works well in a context with a lot of diverse types of musicians and a lot of different types of instrumentalists. It's a lot of fundamental musicianship that applies well to everything else.
Yeah. So when did you first learn about Dalcroze Eurhythmics?
Well, like I said, my dad was a music teacher, and so he didn't know anything about Eurythmics, but he did know enough to know that it was something that was pretty cool, and that maybe he should have his kids do. And in Pittsburgh, where I'm from and where I was raised, there's it's like a really strong Eurythmic scene, a really strong Dalcroze scene here because of Carnegie Mellon. There's a ton, and especially in the 1980s when I was growing up, there was actually some public funding from the city to put on Eurythmics programs. And so I was actually in Eurythmics classes from starting when I was 5.
Oh, wow.
And I was very fortunate to have that exposure to it. And kind of off and on, all the way through high school, really, I would be, if you would go to a music camp or something, they would have Eurythmics there because there was a teacher locally, and so you would find yourself, if you would go to I was always singing choirs, and, there'd be a Eurythmics person who would come in and do something, so it was always off and on something I was definitely aware of. And then when I went on my undergrad, at Duquesne University, we had like a full 2 semesters of Eurythmics with Amanda Ford. I don't know if did you ever meet Amanda Ford?
No.
She was around the Carnegie Mellon scene, but she's a magnificent, wonderful teacher and an absolute light of a person. And I really, really, really enjoyed my undergrad experience. And then after I graduated, I moved to California, and I kind of I started to realize that nobody else knew about it, because for me, it was always a part of what I did. And it was really a fundamental part of my musical approach. And then I would go out in the world and say, hey, how in Eurythmics, and people would be like, what are you talking about? Are you talking about the band with Annie Lennox? They didn't get that what it even was. And so I realized it was kind of special. And when I moved back to Pittsburgh, after, I guess I was out there 8 or 9 years in San Diego, I decided I was going to, get some more training. And so I went, down the road for training and really started getting into it. And eventually really kind of, it became the primary thing that I did in terms of teaching. My teaching is now probably 80 or 90% pretty traditional Dalcroze style.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's good. That's a big percentage. When did you decide you wanted to teach music, or how did that come about?
Yeah.
Was it gradual or?
Yeah, I guess I really kind of made that decision, late in high school. I just really liked being involved. I was in band and choir and orchestra, and I just loved being around that. My dad was a music teacher. It just seemed like a natural fit. I loved going to the, PMEA state events, and, I loved, it just was a scene I wanted to be around, and it just made sense to me to be involved in music. Yet I think I wanted to be a choir director or an orchestra director or something like that when I first got into it. But then, it wasn't too long after being exposed to elementary work that I really decided it was for me. I really like that. I think, how it is, and it might be interesting for some of your listeners to think about if they're teaching piano students, but it's if you don't even start seeing your kid until they're in high school or middle school, man, it's kind of done, it's kind of their foundation is laid. You know what I mean? And if they haven't, if there's certain things that aren't in place by then, it's really hard to get them in place. So to a large degree, if you're teaching in the secondary, your hands are tied. You kind of got what you got. Somebody already bought the groceries for you. Now you can do some things like cooking up the meal, but at the end of the day, you kind of got what you got, to some degree. And I really didn't like that. I really didn't like that. I much prefer to be the one sort of laying that foundation than to be the one who's, kind of stuck with what I got.
Okay, so as far as your music degree then, or degrees, is that in music education, or what is that?
Yeah, I've got a undergrad in music ed and a master's in music ed as well. My master's is from Carnegie Mellon. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. As far as teaching in public school.
Yeah, sure. I mean, public school teaching is interesting. I mean, because as you kind of know, like Dalcroze teachers, actually not typically public school teachers, right? So like the preponderance of Dalcroze teachers are actually not teaching in public school. It's either usually in like some sort of private music academy, or it's in some other kind of context. It's actually, a little bit rare to find somebody who's really as dedicated to using the Dalcroze approach in public school. And I think there's some good reasons for that. I mean, honestly, the priorities of a public school teacher can sometimes be a little bit more utilitarian, and Dalcroze is so holistic that it's hard to assess. It's hard to get your head around exactly what the students are learning all the time. And I think that there's also some fundamental skills that it sort of requires that are like maybe not conventionally the wheelhouse of public school music teachers. For instance, playing the piano, which is, while I advocate that there's plenty of space for people who don't play piano to teach eurythmics, I mean, the majority of people who teach it play piano. I mean, it's like, it's definitely conventional to be that way. And actually, not too many public school music teachers are pianists, because generally, if you're into teaching that public school sort of vibe, a lot of the time you came in through like a orchestra or band program, right? Or you came in from being in that. And so maybe you've got some functional piano skills, but piano majors don't always major in music ed. I mean, it's not really the thing you usually see. So yeah, I think there's some reasons that we don't see as much, but I really advocate for it. I mean, in fact, I write about it all the time on my Substack, musicxt.substack.com, which is where I aggregate a lot of these ideas, but I really advocate for Dalcroze's approach. I think it really does touch on a lot of really, really important things that are going on in public school right now. And I think it's, something that if it caught on and a little bit more in the mainstream, I think we would see some really great results from it. I think a lot of the hand-wringing and the problems that music education is sort of going through, in a lot of ways, I think the Dalcroze approach is a solution that I hope that more people will investigate and try to sort of incorporate, because it's not that common to see. I mean, most public school teachers are if they're using any sort of traditional approach, it might be an ORF-based approach or a Kodai-based approach, which are both fine and wonderful approaches. But the Dalcroze approach is the lesser sort of seen one. So, yeah, it's a little bit unique, the public school context, compared to someplace like Interlochen or someplace like at a university or in a private music academy.
Yeah, and what grades do you teach?
Yeah, I teach kindergarten through 5th.
Okay, through 5. Okay, yeah. And you said you teach like, what'd you say, like 80% of what you teach is eurythmics?
Yeah, I'd say it's like pretty much. I mean, it's shoes off eurythmics every day. And if there's something that I do that's not particularly eurythmicsy, like playing the recorder or something, I still really find a way to incorporate as much of the Dalcroze approach or Dalcroze solfege approach, or interesting sort of quick reaction activities or different ways to make it in line with my values. Even though, like, obviously playing the recorder is not something that I think Emile Jacques was like doing. So I do teach a recorder curriculum, and so there's that. And then, oftentimes you have to prepare for a concert, but even my concerts and things that I'm preparing for, we'll do movement portions, and we'll perform like plastique animé in the concert. So there's definitely a Dalcroze element there. So standing and singing, in a choral fashion is not really a Dalcroze sort of tradition either. But, actually, Dalcroze wrote quite a bit of music, and quite a bit. He wrote these sort of pageants, right? There were these the shows he wrote. What did he call it? They were called like calisthenic concerts or something. I can't remember exactly, but that you can find them, like the manuscripts for them, and they're full of songs and then like choreography that goes with them. So it's really interesting to sort of to find out how the Dalcroze sort of, which is very process based sort of approach, right, where it's like just process, exercises, growth every day, does then result in some sort of product. Right. Yeah. How does it end up in some kind of performance or something like that? Right. So a lot of interesting food for thought there.
So as you know, our primary listenership is piano teachers, like me. So, and I know you're not, and you don't think of yourself as a pianist, but what kind of advice do you can give, or ideas or examples of things that we could do? I don't even know if that's the right question, because really, like a newbie to Dalcroze is gonna be like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm gonna do this, because they have to like experience it themselves,
Well, exactly. You're absolutely right. I mean, that's really the thing about Eurhythmics is if I'm talking to a sort of uninitiated sort of crowd, my first sort of suggestion is, hey, just find a place to get in the room with some Eurhythmics, find a place to do it, because the number one thing you can do is to figure out how this work affects you, right? And allow it to affect you. I think that's really unique. I was just talking with another friend of mine about this, is the way that Eurhythmics training is different, because if you go to Carnegie Mellon, or you go to the training center in Dallas, or you go to a training center in Boston, the focus of the practice is you, right? It's not necessarily like, they might not even ever say, well, this is how you would do this with a group of 5-year-olds. That's not really what they're doing. They're actually like pushing you to grow your musicianship through the training. And it's not always explicit as to why you would use this for teaching. And I think that's unique in methodologies. And so, for people who haven't done it, it's like that might be the first step. Go find a place where you can do it. Look me up, musicxt.substack.com. Follow me on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram. And you'll see where I'm always advertising where there's good Eurhythmics happening. You got Clinton Pratt. He's out there doing the work. And get in the room with some people who are moving together and doing Eurhythmics. And that's the first step, And then there's some really simple things you can do once you kind of realize what that is. You don't always have to be up and moving your full body to be using it. So, one simple thing that I talk about a lot is just the way we would clap a rhythm. And so I know that, I'm sure that as a piano teacher, you would occasionally say, hey, let's look at this rhythm here on the second line. You can clap that rhythm for me. That seems like something that you do sitting at the piano a lot. I know I did when I took piano lessons. That's what my piano teacher would have me do. And he'd be, right? And maybe that was technically correct, what I just did, right? But it was not your rhythmic, right? It wasn't full of life and flow, right? And so actually critiquing a bit the technique of something as simple as a clap, all of a sudden you've entered the realm of Dalcroze, right? So even if you're not going to get up and do, beautiful full body movements, if you just said, okay, instead of just clapping this rhythm in this sort of lifeless way, we're going to kind of bring it to life, and we're going to work on clapping in an expressive way that sort of captures that feeling of that line. And you can train the students to do that very, very easily. And that will yield some interesting results. And I think it will result in a little bit more, vibrant piano playing. That would be a couple of quick suggestions.
Yeah. And let me just remind the audience that we're on YouTube too. So if you're just listening, it might also be helpful to watch the video version, because Anthony was just showing the clap. So if you were just listening, you couldn't quite take all that in. But basically, it's like, instead of just how do you describe it without seeing it? So instead of just like smashing your hands together and they stay together, it's more of like there's the space and you're like exploding out from it, right? And so
that's exactly how I describe it. I call it clap explosion. It's like sometimes I call it anti-clap. It's like it's like the opposite of a clap. Whereas a clap, like the traditional clap, like if you say clap, all of the energy is in bringing the hands together, and there's no thought in what happens after that. It's clap, and then all of the energy is in together, and there's nothing after. Whereas my preferred clap is actually the opposite of that. Whereas I don't really care how you bring your hands together. I want to see what happens after.
Yeah. And sometimes, I'll ask my students. So I teach mostly private piano lessons, but I'll say, okay, can you tell how long this note is? And I'll go like this.
Yeah.
And they're like waiting, and I'm like, do you know how long it is? They're like, no. Yeah. I'm like, why not? And they're like, I don't know. Right. And then I'm like, okay, can you tell how long this note is?
Right. Yeah.
Like, kind of. Yeah. So why? Like, well, because I could see the space or whatever.
And not only that, you could have it crescendo and decrescendo. I mean, you could take that note and you could really make it interesting, right? As opposed to just like, it's just nothing. If you just clap, it's over. There's no thought. And it's like, if the clap is supposed to signify the attack of the note. Now, this is a little different on the piano because of the limitations of the piano, but if it's just supposed to be the attack of the note, then there's so much more to the note, that you're not really accounting for. If all you do is attack and then what? That's nothing. Whereas like the whole duration of the note is super important.
Yes. And in fact, I think that's why it's even more important for piano teachers and piano students to use this approach, because since we aren't really sustaining the pitch, you can, but just by leaving the weight of your hand on the keys. But like, you're not actively doing it, right? Versus like a clarinet or a violin or your voice, you have to do something to keep it going. So with piano, a lot of times we just check out. Like our brain is just like, oh, okay, here's a long note, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? But once you get that sense of, wait, it's done, that it has this length and this, space, then you play different with a different awareness of, all I have to do is sit my hand on the note and wait, but I'm not just sitting and waiting on board. It's moving, right? The music is moving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. And I often find that with pianists that I've worked with and keyboard players, especially that I've worked with, I think there's a difference between pianists and keyboard players in general, but I found that the ones who get that element are just far and away, more successful and more interesting to play with than there's a kind of a piano player who's very mechanical and sort of analytical and mathematical, which is great, a skill in and of itself. But something about somebody who really gets that expressive flow of the weight and the momentum and the energy of a line, it's just really, really important, and it makes such a huge difference in their musicianship.
Yeah, and I encourage piano teachers too to, like, even if you haven't experienced the Eurhythmics class or done any of the training or whatever, just one thing that's like a step beyond the clapping is to step and walk the beat, right? So I hear a lot of piano teachers complain like, oh, my student can't keep a steady beat. And I'm like, oh, what do you do? Well, I have them clap and count the rhythm. And, I'm like, okay, but what about their whole body?
Yeah.
Right? So it's better if you can move through space. Like, you can walk in place, but it's better if you can move. But really, everybody does have a steady beat. Because you can walk, like, unless you have a limp or some impairment, right? You probably walk with a steady beat, and you do have a steady beat. It might not be the same, like if you have a bunch of kids and you tell them to just take a walk, they might have different paces, but each one has their own steady beat, so they can keep a steady beat.
Yeah, but it's not too hard for them to start in training it together. I mean, it's a very small leap from just walk, to then walk, with some music. You just start playing a little bit of music, and all of a sudden you just notice they just start all locking in, and it's a really natural thing. It's natural as you can find. So yeah, that's the other thing I love about the approach is the way it harnesses just natural instincts. It's like you can get really, really far without explaining anything. You can get really, really far without any theory. You can get really, really far. And there's certainly something to be said for theory, and you definitely need to teach that as well. But there's something nice about just an approach that just is really natural and intuitive for the students to say, oh, I get it. There's a beat here, or there's a pattern. My feet want to follow it. They just naturally do it, as opposed to having to explain the beat is the pulse of music or whatever definition. It always sort of rankles me when that's where teachers start. Well, they'll start with, today we're going to learn about the beat, and the beat is the pulse of music. And right. What it is it's like you already lost them. What do you, what do you even? Why are you talking? Stop it. Way better to have them find that pulse and connect to it, and then say, hey, that way you guys stepped along with the music, that's called the beat. And they'll be like, oh, all right, great. That's all the explanation it really needs.
Exactly. Yeah, I love how experiential it is. And that was my first experience with it, was at a music teachers conference where, you go to the lectures and all this stuff. And then we went into this one room, which was a Dalcroze Eurhythmics session I'd never heard of. And there were no chairs. And the lady was like, if you could take off your shoes and socks and come out to the middle. And I was like, oh, I guess this is like a yoga warm up or something. Right. And yeah, but it totally blew my mind, because I'm like, wait, yeah. And there was hardly any instruction. She just like started singing. And I forget what the very first thing was, but like we just started moving and there was music, and like I got it, you know what I mean? And there wasn't even any lecture. Like I just totally got it, and I was sold. And so I love doing that too. Like I've given workshops at various places, and I love the surprise, or like these piano teachers come into the room and they're like, where do we sit? And I'm like, no, just gather here, and I like the minimal talking and instructions, mm-hmm. Or even just my very first thing might be, repeat after me.
Yeah.
Right. And I just do something, and then they just start doing it. And
yeah, actually, sometimes I say, I don't really like talking about Eurhythmics. I mean, I know we're here talking about it right now, and I'm glad to be here with you, but it's way better to do it. It's just not meant to be talked about this way. It's like, and actually in this might be, you might have a little bit of a scoop here. This isn't really super public knowledge, but I've got a book I've written with a colleague of mine, with Stephen Neely from Carnegie Mellon, and it's coming out in February, knock on wood. And one of the challenges of writing a book about Eurhythmics is the fact that it's not really like a written tradition, right? It doesn't really translate super well to that medium, because so much of what we do is experiential and is actually sort of decided in the moment. I don't have a script at all if I'm going in and doing a workshop, or if I'm going in and doing a lesson. I mean, I have some bullet points and some ideas about what I think I might do, but a lot of it is about me being present and awake and alive in the moment with the class and making some decisions and connecting. And so, it's hard to write a book. So that's what we wrote the book about, basically, is this idea of being flexible in instruction. And it's really going to be really interesting. When we get a little closer, I'll be talking a lot more about it. But yeah. It's a really interesting topic.
Yeah, I would love to check it out. So then, as far as playing the piano, because I know you don't consider yourself like that's your main thing, but even I know piano teachers would probably still be impressed with your skills. Like, not that you're playing, Rachmaninoff concerto, but that you can improvise, right? And so I think that might be interesting for our listeners to know, especially because they're mostly piano teachers, is the part of the training involves like how to improvise on the piano, right? How to improvise for certain types of things, right? You want your students to understand a concept or walk around the room to a steady beat, and so what do you play? And you also have to be able to watch them, so it has to be easy enough that you can, be focused and not just all that stuff. So Talk about that for a second, since that's not
Sure.
really your main thing, but you're
So
quite
improvising.
capable.
But what I kind of tell people is like, I think my theory is that the piano is less the important element as the improvisation is the important element, right? So I can imagine teaching a Eurhythmics class on any instrument as long as you're able to improvise for movement, which is, that's really the trick, isn't it? So, and pianists, you know, so sometimes you talk about improv, they think you mean jazz improv, which is not exactly what we're saying here. You know, I mean, I think jazz improvisers often have a better sense for, and that's actually where I started with improv, was with jazz improv. I played bass and I played, you know, and I started learning how to improvise. And I remember really getting that rush from improvisation and being like, oh, I love improvising so much. I really did enjoy improvising on any instrument. So I do have a, you know, a background in it. And I do. And I think that part of the thing about improv might be because of my, you know, deep background in Dalcroze, how it's always been. So I think that my improv comes out of my, you know, training in Dalcroze. Like, it's not, I'm not a pianist who learned to improvise. I'm an improviser who learned how to play the piano. Does that make sense? Yeah. So like improv is a really, really sort of unique skill in that way. Yeah. Like, you know, so there's a lot of different ways to do it, but I think the number one thing is to start with just like things that feel natural, things that feel right. And you know what I like to tell people to do, and this is really hard for pianists to do, is just stop worrying about like the right notes or stop worrying about any of that, and start just like really don't make it sound like anything. I call atonal improv. So it's like just play keys. Right. So it's like, I'm not playing anything there, but see if you can make something that feels movement oriented. How would you play for walking if you just didn't have to worry about anything? Just put your fingers on the keys and play, and make some noises that sound like walking, you know, and like, just get rid of all the suppositions about tonality and all that stuff. That's just holding you back. Right. I mean, if you're, and just learn how to get something that resembles the gesture you're trying to do. You know, so like I do a lot of times I do these sort of stories. I know it's like a real common Dalcroze thing, but like, you know, you tell a story, and then as you're telling the story, you accompany it. And these are really, really great for this, because they're just basically, you're just doing little snatches of things that are just evoking movement. So you might say, oh, well, they're skipping through the forest. Oh, so now let me just do some skipping. Right. So I'm just like playing a little skipping pattern, and that's fine. It doesn't need to be a song, right? And it doesn't need to be very long. And then he would say, oh, and then they came in, there was a giant. Right, so now all of a sudden we've got some things happening. And I think if you start with this sort of nature of improv, and then eventually you start to add in some tonality. Say, okay, well, let's see, we'll do something, and I'm going to use F major. I'm going to do my skipping in F major, and I'll now. Something simple like that to start. And just give yourself baby steps moving forward, and don't be so hard on yourself. You know, it's not going to be, make it intentionally not pretty at first, and then worry about making it pretty later. And eventually you pick up little tricks. It's just about taking time to do it.
Yeah, that's really good suggestion. And I think sometimes it helps to learn from kids too. So like I'll ask my young piano students, you know, to improvise something like, here, improvise this, and I'll do a gesture or a movement. And
that's a great idea.
Yeah. And then I learn from them, because I'm like, oh yeah, it doesn't have to be complicated, but you just captured the idea, you know, like it was they captured the essence of it. You know, the gesture was atonal or whatever. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, and the older students have a harder time. Like if they're in high school and they already know theory and scales, then they're like, oh wait, what key do I play in?
Totally.
Like,
oh, it's a nightmare. Yeah. Right. They're just so self-conscious. Like, and that's what I'm saying. Like, you got to unlearn that, you know, like one of my kind of hero teachers, Leslie Upchurch, she has the adult students she works with do with tennis balls. So put tennis balls in your hand and play. So you just have that. Yeah. And it really helps to like just simplify and, just be like, oh, okay, I don't have any tennis balls here, I would do it. But like you get like just it's really clunky, but you can do different things. The different rhythms don't. You can do little glissandos, and you can kind of really explore just like grand sort of rhythmic and tonal sort of concepts without feeling like, if I'm not playing fancy chords, then this is going to be dumb, And it's like, nobody wants the fancy chords anyway. Just play something simple that works. And for your rhythmics, that's really the bottom line is, does what you're playing make me want to move, that's really it's a one question, evaluation, it's like, did I want to move? Then it was great. If I didn't want to move, then it was not good. It doesn't matter how fancy it was. If it didn't make me want to move, then it wasn't good.
Yeah. Well, Anthony, we're getting ready to wrap up, and I'll ask you in a second just for any final thoughts and or where people can find out more about you.
I'm not hard to find, Clinton. I hope people will look me up. You can go to my Substack is really the main place to follow my work, musicxt.substack.com. You can subscribe for free and just kind of follow what I'm doing there. You can go, I'm on Instagram at Barefoot Music Class on Instagram. People always follow me there, and I'm kind of posting stuff there. And Facebook at MusicXT Movement on Facebook. But yeah, and I'm going to be a bunch of different places in the winter, because that's with the book coming out. We're going to be doing a bunch of kind of book tour things. We're going to OMEA. We're going to TMEA in Texas. I've got a workshop in Philadelphia. I've got a workshop in Minneapolis. I've got a workshop in New York City. I'm going to be all over the place. So look me up and stay in touch, and hopefully I'll see you around the way, man, and at one of these events.
Yeah. So OMEA is Ohio?
Ohio, that's right.
Yeah. So that's where I am. I usually go to OMTA, which is more of like the piano teacher thing. But which city is that in?
Cleveland.
Oh, okay. Oh, shoot. That's like 5 hours from Cincinnati.
Oh, you're in Cincinnati?
Yeah. But yeah.
I was just down in, I'm going to be in Columbus.
Oh.
Actually, but that's at Otterbein University. But that's going to be, I'm trying to think. I'm not sure that's really going to be a public event, but I could probably get you in.
Oh, VIP. That would be awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks a lot. And to our listeners, hopefully this was a teaser, and maybe you're intrigued. You're like, wait, what are they talking about? Because you might not think we were talking about
I try not to get too in the weeds, but I try to be inviting.
Yeah. So check out, I'll link everything Anthony mentioned, and maybe some other things too. But so thanks, Anthony, and thank you, everybody. Until next time, have a great day. Take care.
See ya.